Does anyone actually hold exclusive power when anyone else can copy the powerful's greatest advantage? China has called for organizing nations around downloadable frontier models. Washington is designing one Gatekeeper to certify which models may pass. Both are trying to shape the map, even as the terrain keeps changing beneath them. The claim I'll stand behind is this: ownership at the frontier has become fleeting and temporary, and the people working hardest to make it permanent are the ones who want to hold it exclusively to everyone else's disadvantage. Every gate built around intelligence is a bet that scarcity can be manufactured in the one place it refuses to hold. That bet is going to lose, and almost everyone alive is better off when it does. Come with me, let's get into it. Xi Jinping spoke at the World AI Conference in Shanghai on July 17th. He called the divide between nations with frontier AI and nations locked out of it a historical injustice. That is a powerful phrase, and it's also a claim from the government positioning itself to benefit from the remedy. But that doesn't make the proposal itself wrong. China launched an AI cooperation organization backed by 29 countries. The pitch offers the global south a route around American systems that remain behind corporate gates. Open weights means anyone can download the trained model file. A country can run it on its own hardware and adapt it to their own local needs. It does not have to depend entirely on a foreign company's servers or paying rent in order to access it. Yesterday, we looked closely at the model giving this doctrine real weight. On Moonshot AI's own evaluation suite, Kimi K3 benchmarks near the closed American frontier. Today, the focus is what China is building around that capability. So imagine a Ministry of Health in a country without hyperscale computing infrastructure. It may also lack an export license for the strongest American models. An open weight system gives that country new options. The ministry can download near frontier capability and adapt it for local languages and medical data, and then it can run the model on hardware that it controls. That genuinely broadens access. It brings capable intelligence to institutions that have spent years waiting. Until now, wealthier countries and foreign companies decided when access was appropriate for them. Now, the proposal also expands Chinese influence, of course. A shared model file can still pull countries into a political orbit, so to speak. Governments may build services around Chinese models, and then they may align their technical standards, training systems, and future infrastructure with the ecosystem that actually supplied those models. So Xi's language about injustice serves two purposes here. It identifies a real divide in access that is absolutely there, but it also presents China as the power ready to close that divide. The market treated the move as more than conference theater, though. The Nasdaq slipped roughly 1%. Chip companies faced the sharpest pressure in that. Their prices especially rely on the idea that frontier capability will remain scarce and concentrated in American data centers. Open weights challenge the foundation of that very idea. The old model of technological leadership centered on guarding the crown jewels, so to speak. China is testing a different strategy here. Distribute those jewels and then become the center of the network that forms around them. 29 countries can give that strategy real scale. Every ministry, university, and local company that builds on those models adds weights to the surrounding ecosystem. That's how generosity can create geopolitical pull. Still, the most important part escapes the contest between flags here. Once anyone can download a capable model, the original lab and sponsoring government lose control over every use that follows that download. People can fine-tune it, inspect it, and combine it with local knowledge. They can build applications its creators never planned. China is trying to gain influence by widening access. That strategy still widens access. And here's where I will stop being neutral about this. Both governments are acting in self-interest, and I have said so about this one as well. That does not make the two bets equally sound. Handing out the weights is absolutely the right call, not because Beijing is necessarily generous, but because a capability that can be copied stops being something anyone can charge rent on. It becomes starting material. The opposite bet is the one I think is simply wrong. Holding capability behind a gate treats scarcity as the product and access as the fee. That works right up until someone gives the thing away. And then the whole position has to be defended rather than earned. The capability moves first. Control becomes harder with every copy. All right, shifting across the Pacific here, the same struggle over AI power is producing the opposite kind of institution here. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent helped develop a plan for an independent body to vet the most capable AI models, and the White House is reviewing the proposal. The body would report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Its designers consciously drew from FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. The financial industry funds FINRA, and it works very closely with it, and the federal government oversees it. FINRA regulates Wall Street brokerages without acting as a fully public agency, and that setup really appeals to industry, which generally prefers a regulator that it helps fund and shape. Go figure. Now, look at who has rallied around this AI version of this. In the same window, DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, and Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei each published governance memos. All three propose independent testing before a frontier model's release. Hassabis also proposes certification through a single American-led body. We covered his statement on the Century Report just a couple of days ago. The memos use the phrase, one trusted body. Treasury, the administration, and 3 frontier labs all agree on this. That tells us something. The actors with the strongest positions now see value in the same setup. It doesn't prove that their preferred setup offers everyone else the best protection. The labs that would seek certification are helping write the rules for the certifier. That is not a risk of this capture, that is by design. 3 companies proposed the referee that they would be judged by, and all 3 landed on the same phrase. One trusted body. Trusted by whom is the entire question, and they have already answered it, honestly. It also hands today's leaders a permanent advantage. So let's put a price on that gate. Testing, records, legal work, specialized staff. For a company valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars, that's simply a rounding error. For a university lab, however, a startup, or an open weight project, it is the end of the road. Safety is the language being used here, but the barrier is the product. Independent testing is worth having. I want models tested, obviously. What I do not want is the tested writing the test, funding the tester, and calling the result public safety. Who controls the tester matters more than the thing the tester finds. Europe is also reaching for a related tool from another direction. On August 2nd, European Union transparency obligations will take effect. They include labeling rules for AI-generated content and duties to disclose information about general-purpose models. Now, their methods differ, but both expect to find institutions that they can inspect and regulate. Open weights puts real pressure on that idea. Someone can release a near-frontier model outside the United States, and a country that never joined an American certification system can run it on sovereign hardware. No U.S. body can reliably stop people elsewhere from copying, adapting, or deploying that file. This takes us far beyond the familiar question of whether the labs are capturing their regulator. The proposed regulator may rely on a picture of AI power that is already fading. It assumes a few frontier companies will continue to control that frontier, and it also assumes one certifier can bring those companies before it. Xi's coalition puts capable models into a very different system. The file travels, the host country controls the hardware, the local institution chooses what to build. Beijing and Washington are therefore pursuing opposite containers for the same capability. China is using openness to expand its sphere. Washington is using certifications to keep authority over the gate. Both strategies serve the leaders advancing them. So let's say that plainly. But let's also say the rest. One of them ends with capability in more hands. The other ends with a permission slip. Only one of those is a future worth building. Intelligence is becoming easier to move than the institutions trying to contain it. All right, shifting away again here. Those rival doctrines we just talked about still depend on physical machines, and now the memory shortage has reached the server rack. Inventec, one of Taiwan's largest server motherboard makers, warned Wednesday that memory and CPU shortages could reduce server shipments through the third quarter. Inventec supplies American hyperscalers directly. Enterprise DRAM lead times now stretch beyond 40 weeks. That's nearly a year between ordering a server's working memory and actually receiving it. The warning carries extra weight too because Inventec is seeing record demand. Its June revenue rose by more than 60%, driven driven by AI servers. A company at its own market peak is warning of a deep shortage. The cause begins with high bandwidth memory, or HBM. Now, HBM is stacked memory that feeds data into AI accelerators at enormous speed. Conventional DRAM provides everyday working memory inside things like phones, laptops, and servers. Both come from the same manufacturing base. For HBM3E, every gigabyte requires roughly 3 times the wafer capacity of a gigabyte of simple DDR5, for example. Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron have shifted production toward AI memory, where the margins are much higher. The AI build-out, then, is consuming parts of the supply chain that the rest of computing expected to stay abundant. SK Group Chairman Che Tae-won said Friday that memory demand could nearly double next year, while supply barely grows. He called this a national security issue. We should read that description with the company's interests in mind, of course. SK benefits when governments make chip supply a priority and support domestic construction. The underlying shortage, though, remains real. Che said that states are already working to secure chips for domestic companies. He added that SK is willing to build wherever we can build. The pressure continues farther up the chain as well. ASML is raising prices on the lithography systems that make the advanced chips. China has largely accepted a 10% increase because it doesn't want its fabrication plants to stall. TSMC holds nearly 3/4 of the foundry market. It's resisting the increase. And then the shortage moves down the chain and hits the most price-sensitive customers first. Smartphone shipments in India fell by 1/10 during the June quarter. Among phones costing less than $150, shipments fell by almost half. And that's where abstract talk about chip supply becomes concrete. A factory directs more capacity toward profitable AI memory, and then the cheapest phone becomes harder to build at a price that its customer can afford. This creates intense friction, and it also prompts very clear response when demand looks durable. SK Hynix is committing roughly $268 billion to new plants in Guangzhou. ASML plans to expand production by a third next year and then expand again in 2028. However, the current shortage exposes an idea that many people are betting on that no longer really holds. AI cannot keep growing on a component base sized for the previous era. The build-out is forcing the real cost here into view, and it's also summoning the factories, the equipment, the supply chains needed for what comes next. So memory is one physical constraint, but electricity is the other, and now it's changing the utility industry itself. NextEra Energy and Dominion Energy filed applications in Virginia on Wednesday for a $67 billion merger. The deal would create the largest power company in the United States. Its filing starts a regulatory clock that runs for 180 days. Dominion CEO said the company wasn't looking to sell when NextEra approached last November, but in the CEO's account, data centers changed that circulation because they require so much electricity. Virginia expects to need $55 billion in capital spending over the next 5 years. The companies say that a merger would improve their credit position and lower borrowing costs. And they're also promising customer bill credits worth about $10 a month for the average household. That's the utilities case for consolidation. Regulators now have to weigh it against the risks of putting so much infrastructure inside one company. You can already see the demand signal across the grid, obviously. PJM, as we've talked about many times, is the largest regional grid operator in the country, and it runs a capacity auction to make sure that the region will have enough electricity in the future. Its latest auction finished roughly 7 gigawatts below the reliability target. It drew only about 500 megawatts of new supply. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Chair Laura Sweat called the results alarm bells. FERC has told the North American Electric Reliability Corporation to draft new reliability standards, as we covered here recently. The standards will cover the loads from data centers and crypto mining. They're due by the end of the year. The commission has also scheduled a technical conference on how PJM even runs itself. Sweat called its governance slow where it must be fast. Capital has noticed the same pressure. Energy companies raised more than $12 billion through initial public offerings in the first half of the year. That is the fastest pace since the dot-com peak of 1999. Investors who make money from chip companies are moving toward the power infrastructure that those chips need. Now, Virginia is also producing a very different kind of response. State Senator Luis Lucas, the Senate's president pro tempore, led an effort to end state tax incentives for data centers. The conflict brought Virginia close to its first government shutdown. Lucas said that public anger over the facilities crosses demographic lines, and she argued that people can stop their continued expansion. That resistance reflects many concerns, but one specific policy question sits at the center of this fight. Who pays for the capacity that data centers demand? For decades, utilities could absorb a large customer's electricity demand into the wider grid. They then spread the cost of new generation and transmission across households and other ratepayers. Data center growth has made that default impossible to ignore any longer. Now companies, federal regulators, and the Virginia Senate are all fighting over the accounting, and that fight appears in merger filings and federal reliability proceedings. The utilities want scale and cheaper capital. Data center operators want dependable power. Residents want protection from higher bills and public subsidies. The productive part of the resistance insists that new demand finance the infrastructure it requires. So 2 clocks are now running here. Virginia regulators have 180 days to examine the merger. FERC has given the grid watchdog until year's end to draft reliability standards for large computational loads. Those proceedings will decide more than whether companies build new infrastructure. They'll help decide whose books carry the cost. AI demand is remaking the power system here. Public institutions now have a chance to require that the largest new loads pay their way through it. Shifting away again, while governments and companies fight over ownership, a research team at Duke has shown what happens when knowledge builds across people. Spalding, Durivel, Rahimpour, Kogan, and their colleagues published the work in Nature Communications. They are tackling one of the biggest barriers facing speech-brain-computer interfaces. A speech implant reads neural activity connected to intended words, and it can help someone with paralysis or ALS communicate when their muscles can no longer produce speech. Until now, each system has had to learn one person's brain almost from scratch. Neural signals differ enough between people that a decoder trained on one patient has been nearly useless for the next. Each person needed long recording sessions to build a personal training set. That need for calibration helps explain why implanted speech systems have remained limited to single-digit patient counts. The Duke team used high-density microelectrocorticography grids, often shortened in speech to microECOG. These grids recorded speech-related activity from multiple patients. On the surface, the recordings looked different. The researchers used canonical correlation analysis, though, to map them into a shared latent space. So think of all that as a common coordinate system for brain activity. After the researchers aligned the signals, the differences mattered less. Each brain revealed the same deeper structure related to speech. And then came the result that changes the whole field's direction. A decoder trained on pooled data from multiple patients beat the model trained separately for each person. That runs against the usual intuition. You'd expect a custom model to have the advantage for the person that it learned from directly, right? But here, the wider pool carried useful information that no individual recording session contained. The decoder learned from many brains and worked better than for each single brain. Now, this remains a research result. A new patient can't walk into a clinic and speak through an implant on the first day. Researchers still need to study larger groups and win regulatory approval, and they also need to connect this work with implant hardware before it reaches routine bedside use. The work, though, moves the date closer, and it removes another barrier from the path, and it changes the economics of learning itself. Under the old approach, every patient paid the full calibration cost again. Progress reset with each new person. A shared decoder lets every future recording improve the common foundation. The 101st patient can inherit signal gathered from the 100 people before. That's how a scarce, highly individualized procedure begins to scale. The implant still belongs, of course, to one patient. The knowledge inside the decoder can belong to everyone who follows. All right, let's bring it to a close for today. Can anyone actually hold exclusive power in the world of the future? I don't think so. Xi is using open weights to draw 29 nations towards China's ecosystem. Meanwhile, Washington and the Frontier Labs are rallying around a certifier that could preserve their authority over release. Each side is trying to shape the field to its own advantage. The motives are symmetric, but the bets are absolutely not. One bet says that capability stays scarce, and whoever holds the gate collects for holding it. The other says capability spreads, and the value shows up in what gets built on top of it. Only one of those bets compounds. Every copy of an open model makes the next thing cheaper to build. Every gate makes the next thing wait for permission. Scarcity has to be maintained. Diffusion maintains itself. But that's not the whole story, of course. The physical world sends its invoice. Memory takes nearly a year to arrive. Manufacturers redirect ordinary supply toward AI chips. Utilities merge as data center demand bends the grid. Regulators and communities fight to make the demand that created the cost pay for it. Those are all real arguments, real discussions, and often real limits. But they also summon new capacity and put hidden costs onto balance sheets where everyone can now see them. And then the Duke result shows why control remains temporary. One person's neural recording can improve the decoder for the next person. Capability accumulates across lives instead of starting over at zero. That's the pattern running through today and the overall state of things right now. A model leaves the lab as a downloadable file. A country adapts it. A supply shortage summons new factories. Power demand forces new accounting. A brain recording becomes part of a shared foundation for restored speech. The frontier has belonged, traditionally, to whoever reaches it first. But now we can see the deeper value in the new systems that are emerging. Exclusivity at the frontier is temporary. That is a good thing. To hold the frontier exclusively for yourself is to stagnate. To open it freely so the next person can begin from there, that is real progress. We'll see you tomorrow.